In the last video where I discussed user interfaces and specifically the UI of Cyberpunk 2077, I said that usability in games is often compromised to fit within a theme or a design aesthetic. When this happens, the visual style becomes a priority over the player's needs, and as a result the UI becomes harder to use. In some games, however, making the UI deliberately cumbersome, clunky, and even frustrating to use can ironically improve the experience. This might sound counterintuitive. How on earth could a bad UI possibly be good? But when done well, this is exactly what can happen. So in this video, I want to explore this concept, and I thought, what better example than Alien Isolation? Isolation is an excellent case study because not only does it use bad design to its advantage, it cleverly leverages the source material to create a cohesive and immersive experience. I also just really love Alien Isolation, and I'll take any opportunity to walk through its dark corridors one more time. So let's dive into the world of Xenomorphs and talk about the incredibly successful and stressful UI design of Alien Isolation. To understand why the UI of Alien Isolation is so good at being bad, we first need to talk about what makes a good survival horror game. Survival horror is a genre in which one of the prevailing themes is a feeling of helplessness. Unlike the power fantasies common in many other genres, these games take control away from you, forcing you to think strategically and come up with solutions that aren't always immediately obvious. To achieve this, these games frequently place limitations on what's possible and available to you. Everything from movement, resources, weapons, and even what's visible can be restricted with the goal of taking control away. In other games, imposing these sorts of limitations might be seen as a negative. In horror games though, this lack of control helps enhance the experience. It creates tension by raising the stakes, it makes the consequences of your actions more severe, and it provides a greater sense of achievement from prevailing through adversity. Resident Evil's fixed camera angles and tank controls are an excellent example of this principle in action. They limit what you can see and how fast you can react. You can't simply rotate the camera to get a better view of a dodgy looking corner, you have to physically put yourself at risk to take a peek. And if danger presents itself, the controls cause you to panic as you scramble to find the right direction to run away. Resource management is a common technique used to impose restrictions in survival horror. This is often presented as an inventory or crafting system, and in many instances, the player interacts with these through a UI. Another staple of the genre also commonly presented with a UI is puzzles. These interfaces can be designed to place further limitations on you by demanding that they are completed without pausing the gameplay and/or within a time limit, such as the hacker terminals in Dead Space 2. What all of these games do really well is overload your brain, giving the rational side a problem to solve while simultaneously triggering the fight or flight response. UI design can play a central role in these games because when done well, it can intensify stress levels and emphasize the player's lack of control. Very few other genres take advantage of UI in this way, and fewer still manage to do it as successfully as Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation takes control away from the player in a number of ways, but one of the most contentious of these is the save stations. The ability to save your progress wherever and whenever is a common convenience in modern gaming. Gone are the days when dying meant having to restart the level, or even worse, seeing a game over screen. These days, saving your progress frequently is ubiquitous within game design, so much so that sometimes you're completely unaware of it because it happens automatically in the background. So the act of saving can feel like a relic of the past. Saving your progress in Isolation can only be done at save stations. These are found throughout the Sevastopol, but their locations are rarely convenient. Save stations make a unique beeping noise that becomes louder the closer you get to them. This is important as they don't appear on the map until you've located them or you've found a terminal to update your map. Not knowing their location slows you down because you have to plan your movement around the known save stations. It demands that you choose between pushing forward into the unknown or doubling back to a previous save point. You're never forced to save, but the more tasks you complete in between saves, the more you risk losing a substantial amount of progress. Embedding save points into the game world is not unique to Isolation, it's a common approach to saving in the survival horror genre. But in many other games, saving either provides a safe space or is an indication that you are safe. This is not the case in Isolation. Save stations are located out in the open and the act of saving is slow, so if you try to rush to one of them, you risk making noise or being seen, meaning you won't have enough time to save. If saving was handled in a menu, it would remove the risk-reward that this system is designed to deliver. Integrating saving into the game world keeps you immersed in what's happening, and it prevents the suspense from being broken. It takes a simple and basic feature that's found in most games and not only uses it to maintain tension, but it incorporates it into the gameplay as an important strategic component. This diegetic approach, where the UI is baked into the world rather than being presented as a separate screen, is a key reason why the interface design in isolation is so successful. It limits distractions and keeps you in the moment, which is critical in an experience built on suspense. It's also able to leverage the source material in a really clever way. Adhering closely to the film is an excellent use of anchoring. If you're unfamiliar with the term, anchoring is a heuristic. It's a phenomenon where people tend to have a bias towards the first piece of information they receive about something. This information is then used as the basis for all subsequent views on the subject. In the context of Alien Isolation, the 1979 film laid the groundwork for how things like UI should look and feel to operate. This isn't some clean, high-tech future. This is a grungy, used universe where the technology is unintuitive and in many cases analog. The game leverages this law by emulating the film's lo-fi aesthetic, and in doing so imposes the same usability limitations on the technology. You might be aware that interacting with these devices is frustrating, but you expect them to be that way because it matches your expectations. They were clunky in the film, so it makes sense that they're clunky here. The motion tracker, for example, is a cumbersome, inaccurate, and impractical device. It can only tell you that an enemy is nearby and roughly where it's coming from. It can't tell you what direction it's facing or even if it's in the same room. It operates as a wayfinder too, although it will only point you in the right direction. This basic functionality comes at a pretty significant cost too. You have to pull up the device to see it, meaning you can't have something else such as a weapon equipped at the same time. It also obscures the rest of the screen, and while you can change what you're focusing on, when you're focused on the display, your peripheral visibility is reduced. To make matters worse, it makes a noise that enemies can hear. So in a situation where your visibility is almost non-existent and it could provide vital information, pulling it out can alert enemies of your hiding spot. Forcing the player to use a big clunky device is a perfect example of the risk-reward principle. It makes stressful situations more so by imposing harsh consequences on accessing information that could be helpful or even life-saving. It's very effective at emphasizing how outmatched you are too. It's hard to know where the alien is at the best of times, but if you so much as fart, it can pinpoint your location and come running. Ridley Scott's Alien, like a lot of sci-fi, is full of arbitrary and confusing UI. One of my favourites from the film is the elaborate system that Ripley uses to activate the ship's self-destruct sequence. You could probably make an argument for its design being complicated to prevent accidental activation. In reality though, it was most likely designed that way to help communicate the gravity of what Ripley was doing and how stressful her predicament was. This sets the stage perfectly for the game because including UI with bizarre rituals and over-the-top design doesn't feel arbitrary. It accurately replicates the design patterns seen in the film. Isolation's puzzles do an excellent job at capturing the panic in this scene, and I'm not just talking about the DLC where you literally have to operate this exact system. Many of the puzzles are presented with UI, and along with various other things you can interact with, they're analog in their operation. Handles that need to be pulled down require that you pull down on the stick, and switches that need to be primed ask you to press a button rapidly to convey the effort involved in operating it. In addition, most of the puzzles have to be completed within a time frame. Hacking a door, for example, gives you a visual puzzle to solve before the timer runs out. The puzzle itself isn't terribly hard, but the controls make it challenging to navigate. Rather than simply pressing a direction to select a shape, you need to tune it in first using the analog stick, and then hold the correct position while solving the puzzle. It's easy to overshoot your mark, and failing to keep it tuned in resets your progress. In a way, it's reminiscent of Resident Evil's tank controls because of the amount of cognitive load it puts on your brain. In normal conditions, solving these basic patterns wouldn't be difficult. However, the need to complete them quickly, combined with the omnipresent threat of the alien or worker Joes, makes it much more challenging and stressful than it would be otherwise. Most of the puzzles in the game follow the same design philosophy, combining a physical component with a problem to solve, whether it be timing a button press or manipulating a UI with analog inputs. This again matches up with the analog operation of equipment seen in the film, giving much of the UI in the game a tactile feel. One of my complaints with the UI in Cyberpunk 2077 was the overuse of window dressing. This is where superfluous design elements are used to theme or style the UI. In the case of Cyberpunk, window dressing is used to make the UI appear more futuristic, but at the cost of usability. There's plenty of window dressing in isolation, although here it has a purpose beyond theming the UI. The additional design elements used in this interface make it hard to know what is useful information and what is just there to look techie. Toggling systems on and off is actually very simple, but all of these additional buttons give the impression that it's much more complicated. This tricks you into overthinking the solution and spending significantly more time trying to figure it out. And time is something that you're always running out of in isolation. In Cyberpunk, this type of superfluous design made many of its UIs unintentionally confusing, but here, that's exactly what it's intended to do. Unfortunately, for all the exquisitely designed diegetic interfaces in isolation, there are a few curious omissions. Crafting and maps are the two most obvious. The map design is similar to the schematic of Hadley's Hope seen in the second film, so aesthetically it's not out of place. This might be why it's shown as a separate screen, because if it was part of the game world it wouldn't be portable, and this would dramatically reduce its utility. You can update the map by finding designated terminals. Where this information goes though is never explained, and this does make it feel a little video gamey. It may have been possible to show the map as a physical object, like the map in Firewatch, but given the complexity and the scale of the maps in isolation, cramming this much information into a handheld object would undoubtedly make it less easy to use. Overlaying such a detailed map on the game world would also make it hard to read. This might explain why it pauses gameplay and appears in its own screen. It does feel a little jarring because almost everything else takes place in real time, although outside of inventing some kind of tablet device, which wouldn't be very authentic to the alien universe, I can't see an obvious solution that's better than what was implemented. Crafting is handled in a typical 2D interface as well. Unlike the map though, this is a task you complete without pausing gameplay, which means you remain vulnerable while assembling items. Constructing these items in real time is a good way to create urgency, but presenting this process as a UI that sits on top of the game world takes you out of the moment because it breaks the fourth wall. If, for example, you were required to craft at designated workbenches, a la The Last of Us Part 2, not only would you remain inside the game world, but it could heighten the sense of claustrophobia because it would limit what you can see. The design of the crafting UI does fit the universe perfectly, however, it's not a great fit for the task of building physical objects. Amanda isn't actually using some kind of terminal to craft these items as the UI suggests. To the best of our knowledge, she's assembling them with her hands. On top of this, the sound effects used for this menu don't fit the actions being performed, so neither the auditory or visual design align with what's happening. Seeing Amanda physically assemble the parts would be much more immersive. Again, The Last of Us handles this much better, showing the item being assembled along with the appropriate sound effects. Handling crafting in a UI was most likely chosen so that it could be done quickly, at any moment, and in any location. It's hard to argue with that reasoning, and apart from it being a strange fit contextually, this UI does a good job of making it just hard enough to craft items with any kind of speed. Alien Isolation is unique for the way that it leverages the source material. This gives it a bit of an unfair advantage over games that are based on original IPs. Nevertheless, emulating the look and feel of the Alien film, particularly when creating bespoke environments and objects to interact with, was likely no easy feat. The team could have easily gone with 2D interfaces for everything, but I think the results here speak for themselves. Like most games, there's room for improvement, and no doubt if a sequel ever materialized, some, if not all of my complaints would be addressed in some way. As it stands, what Creative Assembly achieved with Alien Isolation is rare. It's arguably one of the greatest movie tie-in games ever made, and its UI design is a key component that unifies the gameplay and visuals. If you enjoyed this video, a like is always appreciated, and of course a dislike will let me know I need to improve. If you're new around here, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when new videos go live, and if you want to support the channel and find out more about how I make these videos, head on over to the Patreon page. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
What's up?